Hey guys, it's Drake, and today's going to be more of a rambly video. Not sure what I'll talk about, or if I'll bring up any books. Inevitably, I'm sure I will, but I haven't decided or written anything down. But just been thinking a lot now that I'm done with my second year of teaching, and I'm entering summer break. And this will be my first summer break because last summer break I worked the whole one. And this will be my first summer break in about 10 years since I was in high school. So I'm, thinking about what I want to do, a lot of things I want to research, some things I want to write, some places I want to go, people I want to visit. And so some of the things I want to research, some things I've been thinking about. So one thing you get as an added benefit of being a teacher is you basically become an anthropologist of your own society, an archaeologist of the present. And one thing that has me, so one thing I've been thinking about because of that is all societies have their ups and downs, and rather than being, a 2D graph where, you have curves, it's 3D topological map where some things are good and some things are bad at any given time, depending on where you cut it. But to me, at this point, it is undeniable that America is in a period of significant decline. That is relative to other regions of the world and relative to itself. Now, like I said, some things are getting better. I do think it's easier to be well educated now than any other time in history. And because of that, it's easier to empower yourself to not be trapped in your thoughts. But that also means that it's easier to throw your time away doing useless stuff more than ever. So I'm not convinced that greater access to knowledge will actually improve anything. We'll have to see. Basically, it's an empirical question, and we'll see in the next, I'd say a couple decades. So that's one thing that's getting better. I also think we are on some trajectories of things getting better explicitly. The amount of energy needed per person is decreasing. And I think that'll be good for a multitude of things. I hope it keeps going that way. I don't think that means we need, more trash or more things at a cheaper cost, lower energy. Hopefully people will realize what actually matters and they'll get rid of all the garbage. We'll see if that's the case, but I do think that's one thing that's improving. More and more people getting access to energy and then needing less of it after they get access. But then there are some things that are inevitably getting worse in the United States. Economic prospects for my generation are worse than they've been since the 1930s. And most older people don't care or haven't realized it yet. But many people in my generation, it's a foregone conclusion to buy a house unless you are intelligent or have wealthy parents. There are outliers, but that's basically the case. The economy is clearly declining every year and has been stagnant since the early 70s. It's just we had so much latent wealth before that it was harder and harder to recognize the earlier you get, but now it's a barefaced fact. And basically nobody wants to decrease their standard of living to account for the tightening economy or the declining economy, which I think is more appropriate. And I think the main problem is that the retired class, the wine and golf course class, don't want to quit. They want to keep going to the golf course and drink $100 bottle of wine. They don't want to pay more taxes. So that's where all this starts, because in the United States, all of our current problems were visible by the 1950s. And this is something I've been researching, but I think we're set in place by the early 70s. And they have not been meaningfully changed since. And, Gaddis was trying to save Russia. There's a clip of Gaddis talking about Tolstoy and Gogol, how Tolstoy was trying to save Russia and Gogol was trying to save Russia. And he has this comment that the writer naively tries to warn people of what's happening, and they'll all of a sudden realize it and, change their mentality about things. And of course, no one cares. They're just gonna, step on the pool of ice and slip down the stairs, even though there's a big warning sign saying, watch out for ice. Whatever metaphor or analogy you want to attach to it, Gaddis was trying to save Russia. Gaddis was trying to save the U.S. And no one cares. And we're continually going down the path that, at least Gaddis warned us about, starting with the recognitions all the way to Agape Agape. And, there are different estimates. I mean, China's doing a lot of the same things we are, but depending on what you look at, there are projections that China's economy is going to be larger than ours by next year. And you don't see that talked about really. I do think social connections in the United States are getting worse and worse. As time goes on, more people have to move for work because work is getting more and more scarce. And that means that you're not around your grandparents, you're not around your childhood friends, you're not around your parents even, maybe if a divorce happens. Our society is built around some type of independence, and children now, when they turn into adults and get through college, many of them are financially unstable due to student loan debt and medical debt, so they have to move back with their parents, who themselves are probably under credit card debt and medical debt. And when you look at the debt to wealth ratio in the United States, there's more debt than the collective wealth of everyone and everything in the United States. So it's clearly not going to continue forever, and I still have a lot of years to live. So when you put those two facts together, there's only one conclusion you can come to, and you're basically just waiting for the collapse to happen. And we've seen several worst case scenarios in human history. You can have a civil war. You can have an economic depression, like the Great Depression, which happened, less than 100 years ago. And there's no reason why it couldn't happen tomorrow necessarily with the clear economic bubble we're in. When you look at, that's interesting. Why is Apple a $3 trillion company? Why is Tesla a $1 trillion company? Why is Google a $1 trillion company? All of a sudden, why is Bitcoin so big? And it's basically because people have no faith in the rest of the economy, so they're attaching their belt to the lifeboat that's already full, and we're stacking up these lifeboats, or you can think of it another way. We're adding our little bit of helium to the balloon, and we're all trying to hold on to this balloon, hoping it'll hold us all up. But if everything around these lifeboats in the economy collapse, what's the value in having Facebook or Meta or Amazon. What's the point of having an e-commerce monopoly if you can't buy anything or nothing gets shipped from China to buy? And I think one of the main problems that I've discovered in our society is that the people smart enough to change it get captured by it. The people smart enough to understand the system enough to change it become captured by the people in control and then contribute to making the system more difficult to change. And of course, that's always the way things have been. But I do worry with more and more powerful technology becoming cheaper and cheaper, that methods of control will become cheaper and cheaper. And that's basically, the last 100 years of dystopias are more or less about that in one way or another. Zombie dystopias is usually a medical apocalypse. That you have nuclear war dystopias, which is about nuclear bombs becoming so cheap you can build enough to exterminate humanity, which has already happened, obviously. And then any little or big pop-off that happens, like Ukraine, that could lead to nuclear holocaust. There's no way to rule it out. And then, of course, now that we're in the age of the internet and so many things rely on the internet, cyber warfare, it would be trivially easy to kill hundreds of millions of people with cyber warfare. And I think it just hasn't been done yet. I think that's something we'll see in the next, 10 to 20 years. Also, people assuming ability to control nature, I think, is getting less and less likely, with obvious problems related to climate change. Because the climate is changing very rapidly, and I think people misunderstand what's going on with, climate change. It's not that it's getting hotter that's the problem. People could survive in a hot Earth. It wouldn't be a problem if it was getting colder, necessarily. People have survived in an ice age. But it's the number of people we have on Earth and how quickly the change is happening. That has never happened in human history before. So we're stepping into a dark room. The room is not big enough to hold the number of people stepping into the room. And we're going from, a good temperature to a 110-degree room. Of course, we could cool the room down, but with all the people in it, that's not going to work very well. It's going to stay hot. And who knows what will happen with all the people? Some people have to go somewhere else. And what if the people who are already somewhere else don't want the people to be there? And I think, this book recently I read a few months ago, When We Cease to Understand the World, basically talks about the complexity of things is outstripping human ability for comprehension, except for, the very top level of people, top level of intellect. And I think that's basically the problem we're having with collective truth and consensus and democracy and the general realm of things, that the average person that doesn't put in work can basically understand nothing. And there are many things. I don't believe that phrase, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. I totally don't buy that. Because, we don't write scientific papers in poetry. Mathematics can hold quite a lot of complexity in a small area. But what you're doing is basically you're front loading the complexity in decades of learning math. And in a similar way, poetry can hold like maximal linguistic complexity. But again, you're front loading it by years and years of reading poetry and speaking to people and stuff. So that's only compact in the moment. It's not compact over time. And I think basically what's happening is if you can't learn quickly, the amount of time required to put in to understand many things would extend beyond the average lifespan. So if you wanted to understand the economy, even if you took a relatively meager reading list of economics works, and let's say you're a relatively intelligent person, like you're smart enough to get a PhD in a university, in any given whatever you're interested in, whatever you're good at, it might take you 5 to 10 years to become an amateur expert in economics. And that's assuming you're working a job and, maybe you have a few other interests. And that's already assuming a pretty high level of competency, intellectual competency. And then let's say you want to become an expert in the history of the major empires of the world, or major civilizations of the world. So then you learn about, the Han Dynasty, Tang Dynasty, Song Dynasty, all the way through China. You learn about the caliphates in the Islamic Golden Age. You learn about the Roman Empire, the Greeks, Charlemagne, and the current American Empire, Soviet Union. To really become knowledgeable in those, that would take another 10 years. And if you stack that on with the economics, you'll become less knowledgeable in each comparatively, as opposed to being focused on one or the other. And again, that's assuming a fairly high intellect and ability to learn, quickness of learning. So that's basically what everyone dies. And that's why intellect matters, because it means the speed with which you can take in new information. If nobody died, intellect wouldn't matter, learning stuff. But it does. And that's one problem I think our society is going to have to come to the conclusion about, because there's a lack of quality in our education system because people think you can just take forever learning whatever you are learning. Like theoretically, you could take 18 years learning addition. And it's almost like, well, if it takes 18 years, it takes 18 years. But then the obvious question is, well, what are you going to do when you're out of school? After 18 years, are you going to stay in school for 50 years so you can learn up to calculus? And I think we're going to have to come to a reckoning about how we devote our resources, because we have diminishing resources every year. Currently, it could change, but it hasn't changed in the last 50 years. We've had diminishing resources every year. We've had bubbles, which don't actually count, and then we've had declines after bubbles, which show us how we should actually be living. And, the U.S. has had diminishing resources for the last 50 years. Less and less to split up between more and more people. That I think is the heart of all the problems we're seeing now. And many people aren't coming to that conclusion. I always think about, when's the last time you heard that the U.S. economy has been effectively stagnant since 1970? You get these lies about, the stock market is the highest it's ever been, low unemployment rate. But the low unemployment rate means that, the vast majority of Americans are working 2 part-time jobs, getting no medical benefits, and have 4 credit cards just to afford everything. That doesn't sound like economic progress to anybody. And, the unfortunate thing is the people deciding everything don't ever meet those people with 4 credit cards working 2 part-time jobs. And those people deciding everything don't have a real understanding of what's going on. And that's why, reality is going on its normal path, and people's understanding of reality has become more and more distorted and displaced and separated from what is actually going on. And the only reason that can happen is because the economic system is detached from reality. Many people's ideologies they're trapped by, they're imprisoned by, are becoming more and more detached from reality. And the problem is, we've seen this before. This is not a new phenomena. This happens every time any prosperity starts to end. When the parade ends, when the carnival is over, there's this transition period where some people realize it sooner than others. Some people still want to have the show go on. Some people are already, moving on. And, I think that's happening. And, it's a lot to think about. But one thing I am grateful for, and I almost say it offhandedly, but I've been reading Virgil's Georgics lately. I just, at this point, I just pick it up and read random bits and just, read the second Georgic or whatever, just enjoy it. And, so many people, so many historians, writers have lived through collapses. Some of my favorite writers have lived through World War I and World War II. And they made it, and we still have their books, and materially, many people in the United States have a better chance at a better life than almost everyone in human history. And while I think that is causing some severe problems, I never forget how appreciative I should be about that. Another thing I say, like kind of jokingly, is my library is better than Napoleon's. And, he probably had more gold leaf in his library, but I have better books. Did he have a complete academic translation of the Rig Veda with supplementary materials? He didn't have access to something like the Golden Bow, facsimile of the Fairy Queen, Adonis by Giambattista Marino, etc., etc. And that is one chance I think we have to try to end on a more positive note. The chance I think my generation has, that no generation in human history has had, is to fully understand the scope of humanity. We can go all the way from the skeletons in the Rift Valley to the cave paintings and the pyramids and the clay tablets of Mesopotamia to the invention of writing, the independent invention of writing around the world, in multiple places, to the preservation of books and Neolithic technologies that continue today. That's one thing I've been wanting to research, Neolithic technologies. Coinage is a Neolithic technology. Currency is a Neolithic technology. Writing is a Neolithic technology. Cities are a Neolithic technology. There were no cities before the Neolithic period, give or take 10,000 years ago. 10,000 BC, give or take 9,000 BC in the Levant. And just the longevity of Neolithic technologies gives me some hope. Things that people invented 10,000 years ago are still useful. Books are basically a Neolithic technology, and they're still one of the most valuable ways to learn anything is by reading it in a book. So that does give me hope in the sense that even if we have as I like to say, even if we have a very bumpy ride over the next few decades or 100 years, I am confident that humanity will make it through. But the experience might be horrifying, the experience of making it through. But I have no doubt that an image comes to mind from William Faulkner's Nobel Prize acceptance speech, or speech he gave, where he said, even after, nuclear bombs are dropped or, some horrific thing happens, as long as there are people left, there will be someone talking. There will be someone telling a story, someone talking about their grandparents or their childhoods, or a dream they had, or their favorite fairy tale or something. So, yeah. I don't know if I'll upload this because this has been quite jumbled and doesn't have a whole lot to do with books necessarily, as my channel's theme is, but this is a lot of what I've been thinking about lately. And I want to do more research into the Athenian democracy. If you have any book recommendations for me. So Athenian democracy, I want to do more research into Neolithic technologies. That includes domestication of, domesticated farm animals. That chiefly happened during that period. Cities, coinage, and writing. Those are my main research interests there with Neolithic technologies, because they all continue to today. We have not extended past the Neolithic in that sense. The imagination of the Neolithic is still with us. I want to do more research into the rise and fall of empires and civilizations, and I already have a handful of good books on that. Peter Turchin is one I'm interested in now, an evolutionary anthropologist. I want to research Virgil more. I have a couple biographies that I found about him, but if you have any especially good works on the Aeneid or the Georgics, that's what I'm especially interested in. Let's see, what else? I want to research the 1950s. Explicitly in 1950s in the US, but I'm also going to research Khrushchev and just everything in the 1950s, because I think the 1950s is the last chance we had. Right after World War II ended, that was the last chance we had to do something, and we didn't do it. So 1950s, really interested in that. And then I just want to learn more about economics. I want to learn why things are the way they are, why they aren't different, what could be different, and how to do something different, because it's clear to me, it's obvious that something needs to change. And no one's talking about possible changes, at least in the wide scope of the public. Yeah, it's kind of a dizzying array of things, but you don't have a lot of time, so you gotta learn what you want to learn. I try not to let anything hold me back. So Another thing I'm kind of getting interested in is I'm going to be teaching The Great Gatsby next year. And I have to say, I was underwhelmed by The Great Gatsby in school. But after basically educating myself in modernism to a pretty deep degree, I think it'll be interesting to go back and read The Great Gatsby as history. You know, as history of the 1920s, before the collapse happened, before World War II happened, before Nazi Germany really got going, and connecting The Great Gatsby to the rest of the world, you know, connecting The Great Gatsby to 1925 reality. My school wants to focus on the idea of the American dream. And I'm like, okay, we're doing this again. But I think there are some interesting ways to talk about that are basically never talked about because nobody does any research ever. No one looks into anything, and you just rehash the same, BS. So yeah, I have a pretty strong opinion about that. But I have some interesting ideas on researching, the Gilded Age, the development of the idea of the American dream, which really was spawned in the Gilded Age, the debasement of the American dream by robber barons and business magnates as proof that the American dream is failing, as opposed to the kind of thoughtless perspective that they are evidence of the American dream. Wait, you don't want to have a $700 million mega yacht? Are you even a real American? That's almost like the idea you're supposed to have. But it's the opposite. They are proof. They are proof that the American dream is failing. The fact that Jeff Bezos has $200 billion net worth means that the economy is doing so poorly that anyone with money, which is, the top 10% of Americans, the bottom 90%, do they invest meaningfully in the stock market apart from whatever retirement they might or might not have? No. Top 10% of Americans are trying to hitch a ride on the Amazon lifeboat, hitch a ride on the Tesla lifeboat, ride through the coming bumpy ride. So that's evidence that the average American has nothing to dream about, too old to dream, too poor to dream, and we see it. We see it in so many things. Gun violence, drug epidemics, dropping education, lowering life expectancy, susceptibility to demagogues. It goes along with the collapse of the so-called American dream. And Gaddis wanted to save Russia. All right, well, I might throw this up. But yes, I've been in the most effed up situation with my goddamn apartment. I have to move again, long story short. So it's been extremely hectic. I don't even know what's going on. But I have 2 more Patreon videos I am putting up, and the next one's going to be up by the end of May. The second one might be up early June. I'm trying to do them both by the end of May, but it's getting pretty late in May. So I'm going to put those up. One will be a contemporary book. One will be an older book. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this. And it's as important as ever to remember, death is a gang boss.